शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशितिकण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिणि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिणि शङ्करतोषिणि किल्बिषमोषिणि घोषरते धनुजनि रोषिणि दितिश्रुतरोषिणि दुर्मथतोषिणि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते.
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I hope the audio is coming fine. Yeah, it is. We have back with us for the second time Rami Niranjan Desai ma'am. Thank you for joining us, ma'am.
Thank you, Niranjan. Thank you for having me.
Wait, something is wrong with your audio now. It wasn't up until now when we were talking off screen.
What do you mean? You hear me or
It's
is it
the
bad?
volume is a little too low. Wait, let's see if I can do something about it. Wait, I'll just increase it from here as well. Okay, ma'am.
Is this better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay.
So guys, first of all, say extra thanks to ma'am for not cancelling today because she is pretty under the weather as she has been traveling all around for the country, not for having fun and travels.
I wish it was that.
Yeah. Do you get any time to just have a trip and take a vacation and stuff?
No, I actually have been thinking about it for a really long time. This is my 7th week of like usually it happens in like really long space. So this is my 7th week right now for this cycle that I haven't taken a day off and I'm
my
just
God.
traveling non-stop. But I think the time is coming. My body's telling me I can't do this any longer.
Yeah, when you said that I'm only free on the Saturday, I thought, okay, what does that even mean? Because on Saturday she's coming to a podcast to discuss the things she does anyway for the rest of the week. So
Yeah, I didn't think it would come across like that, but it's true.
yeah,
What does somebody mean by that? They're only free on Saturday to do a podcast.
yeah,
No, it's like between my travels, so I came back like yesterday. I even forget when I came back, and then I'll be here today, and I'm leaving only at 4 a.m. in the morning. So then that means I have this day free, so I can do it. But I wouldn't cancel on you anyway. You're the only person I know who does their homework and comes.
thank you, ma'am. And now you are on the verge of becoming a household name in Indian politics discussion circles because you appeared on Beer Biceps as well. And I need to give credit to Deepda, journalist Deep Haldar, for suggesting this fascinating topic. The Bangladesh expert Deep Haldar suggested this topic where we need to ask the Northeast expert, how can the Bangladesh crisis affect the Indian Northeast? So, ma'am, how really? Are the infiltrations just the only problems?
First of all, Deep has been watching Bangladesh so closely, and he's so good at it. He's really an expert that he would have been able to answer this question as well. But let me attempt at it because the instability that we've been watching, honestly, wasn't, and this regime change wasn't something that observers like us had. It came as a surprise to us.
Right.
Well, we'd been watching. You know this. I think you'd been following the developments as well, as
Yeah.
was as was I, as were other people. We knew that the regime change was happening, and the dialogue of this that a regime change might happen was fairly robust. At least 2 years before it did happen, that what would happen?
I see.
If a regime change happened, we used to discuss this. Whenever him and me also met, we'd always discuss this, that if a regime change happened, what would happen to the Northeast? The Northeast would be impacted. So, having said that, the fact that everybody knew that was going to happen, and the reason that we knew that it was going to happen very soon was because of the kind of things that were being done in Bangladesh, especially if you observed the US diplomats in Dhaka, you'd realize that there was a very deep interest in focusing on the opposition at that time, which was the BNP, and there was the Jamaat supporters as well, but also the fact that there was this deep-seated fundamental suspicion and hatred for Sheikh Hasina. They
Hmm.
ended up, if you remember, they ended up also putting sanctions on their elite paramilitary force, the Rapid Action Battalion, senior, officers from there. They put sanctions on them so that they couldn't travel, so on and so forth. Which, to me, was a really, really aggressive move to take because it's another country's paramilitary force.
Yeah.
The envoy, Ambassador Haas, also visited the opposition. He visited the election commission. There was this undue interest in what was going to happen in the Bangladesh election. So everything was pointing towards this. So I wouldn't say that it's come as a surprise to us. If it hasn't come as a surprise to us, I don't think it's come as a surprise to the northeastern states.
Okay.
Political, politicians in those states, also our security forces and our intelligence. But obviously, with every situation at a different time, things change. We already know the history of the Northeast, but I'm just going to take a minute to,
Yeah. Yeah.
refresh these memories.
Yes, please.
We know that when previously, before Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh was used as a location for not just to have funding, terror training, but it was a safe haven for terrorists that operated in the Northeast. I remember traveling to Tripura many, many years ago uh, when BNP was in power. And I remember people saying, oh my God, this NLFT threat. NLFT was one of the major organizations, terrorist groups that was working in Tripura, saying, can't be really curbed because the borders are porous and they do what they have to do and they run back in. That was also the time because of BNP's proximity to ISI, to Pakistan, that Bangladesh was being used by ISI to launch its designs against India, which included weapons trade, which included training of militants, giving all sorts of support to militants, and ensuring that that there was unrest in the Northeast. So those were the years when unrest was peaking, right from the 80s, 90s. Things were very bad in the Northeast at
Yeah.
that time. That was one of the reasons that nobody used to travel there, and it was known from the lens of uh, uh, terrorist activity. It was when Sheikh Hasina, and this was also the same with Ulfa, and mind you, even with NSC and IM and all. Of course, they got their training in China. Uh,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that they didn't have tacit support from the ISI. All enemies, with a common enemy, tend to band together
Yeah.
against the common enemy. So they also
Yeah.
had this tacit support. It was when Sheikh Hasina came in that we know that there was a strong fundamental change in policy towards India, and therefore there was a major crackdown on terrorist funding, terror activities, and the usage of Bangladesh as a safe haven for these terrorists. And there were multiple treaties that were also signed, border treaties during her time that assured India that this sort of terror activity it would be actively curbed by the government in Bangladesh. Now, of course, uh, that is the past, and now we know we are dealing with new realities. The
Hmm.
current instability in Bangladesh really presents challenges because of the radical elements and their broader networks of global Islamic fundamentalism that we are seeing right now. There isn't just a design of taking over Bangladesh, but there is this sort of hatred towards India, and they know that
Yeah.
the Northeast is in a precarious position. Um,
Yeah.
I'm going right at the outset of this regime, if you don't mind me taking a couple of minutes,
Hmm.
uh, I remember right at the outset when this regime change was happening, a lot of people said, oh, we must rely on the secular forces in
Right.
Bangladesh. There
Yeah.
are these people. This isn't a genocide. And, it sort of, it shocked me because what are you on? Yeah, it's only been a week. So obviously it is not going to match the parameters of a genocide, but common sense will tell you that if there is this sort of instability and lack of control that right at the outset has been displayed by the interim government, the chances are it's only going to get worse, not better. Um, and that's exactly what we've seen. We've seen what's happened with ISKCON. We've seen what's happened with other temples. But
Yeah.
even student groups and protesters, one always hopes for some sort of open-mindedness and this sort of secular ideals that we hold so high in our lives,
Hmm.
to be among the youth. But they themselves have openly issued
Yeah.
threats targeting India, specifically the seven sister states and West Bengal. You
Hmm.
know, Muhammad Yunus, who obviously is a very ambitious man and is the caretaker, is the head of this caretaker government, um, has not been able and does not have the intention to bring any of this under control because he's trying to appease the fanatical forces. He's also, given these veiled threats. He's also said things like, "Oh, Bangladesh seeks friendly ties with India." We did have friendly ties. I
Exactly.
mean, what do you mean you seek friendly ties with India?
Right.
You're not get friendly ties. You could have maintained the friendly ties we had.
Exactly. You
But
destroyed it just 1 month, 2 months back. How? What do you mean you seek it now?
what do you mean you seek it? Did we have bad ties? No, we had great ties. You
Yeah.
came and you ruined it. Now you
Yeah.
are seeking it, and you're seeking it by creating these monsters where there are none to be seen. For example, he says things like, "If you destabilize Bangladesh, it will spill all over, including Myanmar and the Seven Sisters in West Bengal." What do you mean? If you destabilize Bangladesh, I mean, this is obviously some sort of a cautionary message to India. The only
Yeah.
person destabilizing Bangladesh is you and your friends, and the Indian government, rightly so, has interpreted this statement as an implicit warning, particularly to its northeastern security lens. And therefore, if not just we are seeing a rise of fundamentalism and this sort of fanaticism in Bangladesh, we are also seeing this sort of support from the regime that refuses to accept that there is a problem and has decided to target India for absolutely no fault of India. So, if there is the
Yeah.
government itself that is saying, well, it's all right, India's kind of not saying it directly, but trying to say that India is really the one causing this, then I think we're in a little bit of trouble because it was recently. Remember when the regime change happened? We were saying that, oh, they're saying that another 6 months elections will happen, maybe maximum another year. I think it was just recently he said 4 years. It could take as long as 4 years. Now, if we are going to contend with a regime that cannot manage its own country, a regime that's kind of being soft on the radicals, and a regime that's holding India at task for its own mess, you can imagine the kind of spillover effect it will have on the Northeast, notwithstanding the fact that Myanmar is in trouble as well. I'll stop here till, you can ask me.
Ma'am, growing up in a secular leftist family, we've always, of course, loved and respected Bangladesh for being land of our ancestors and great poets and stuff. Um, I think after growing up and when we were in our adolescent days, we realized that actually Bangladesh don't really people from Bangladesh don't really like us all that much, except maybe some poets and stuff from the Dhaka area only. They are the ones who like us. So we realized maybe we thought it's maybe just because of our enmity based on cricket and stuff. but all of this can't be just because of cricket. And then I realized that okay, they are not even taught about India's help that they received in 71, etc. Even for that, I kind of rationalized in my own head that okay, everyone does not have to teach that kind of low self-esteem history to their own students, that your ancestors were not that big of a deal, everyone else was big deals and stuff. So I guess they also did not do that. They taught them, their students, that yes, we were the gigantic heroes, there's nothing called India, we fought the battle on our own and won. So is it a backfiring of those kinds of education systems? What exactly are they that pissed off about India for?
See, I think we Indians love to romanticize things. We
Yeah,
love to romanticize our neighbors and this old, like some sort of, a couple of poets that come up and,
yeah,
who sing songs about love, write poetry about unity. We love that kind of stuff, and we want to believe that everybody is like that.
right.
Unfortunately, is this there we have had this history of the kind of education, the kind of even intellectual environment where
Hmm.
literally the intellectualism has been rigged to suit political
Hmm.
mandates. And that has caused us great amount of disservice because we've stopped thinking reasonably, we've stopped thinking rationally, and we've stopped being analytical. Um, I remember even with Bangladesh, people kept saying that, oh, the economy is doing better than India, and the economy is going to, take them places. I'm really glad the economy was doing well, but did people not realize that in a country like that, it would take very little to derail that economy, that
Yeah,
the population was going to be a problem, that everything was centralized in Dhaka and maybe a little bit in Silhet.
exactly. Yes,
There isn't any other urban centers, that
right.
there's a high rate of radicalization. It was a government that was trying to balance it and keep it in at bay. It was not about the people themselves because honestly, I mean, it hasn't been months since the regime change, and we already have this huge influx of immigrants to our border. If Bangladesh is doing so well, why are people trying to come here? But also
Yeah,
that, also that I don't understand that where have we come with this sort of, where have we come with this sort of analysis that, oh, they're going to love us, and it's about brotherhood and it's about peace, because the fact of the matter is religion plays a role. And
hmm.
if we want to avoid that this discussion that religion doesn't play a role and that there are different, there are different countries with different outlooks, no, that's not true. Religion does play a role. There is this ambition. There is a reason why Jamaat is a transnational group.
Hmm.
There is a reason why I remember when L.E.T. Katunda, the great bomb maker, was caught. What
Yeah.
did he say about the Rohingyas? He said, I have been training the Rohingyas specifically with the oath that they attack only India,
Hmm.
only Hindustan, and no other country with the training that I give them. Yet, and this was, this was public knowledge. Yet we have people have who have advocated for India giving the Rohingyas refuge in our country. Uh,
Yeah.
which again comes from the point of view that we don't want to be realistic, and we have intellectual rigging going on, where it rigging to an extent where, oh yeah, if you say stuff like this, you're a great person, and if you say no to refugees coming in, you're a bad fanatical fundamentalist Hindu. But the fact of the matter is that it was only last month that 130 Rohingyas were caught in Assam. They had changed their names. That there have been operatives who've been caught in Tripura as well, who we also know were trained by ABT in Bangladesh. And this is, I am giving you only, a few of the
Yeah, of
arrests
course.
that have happened.
Yeah.
Uh, Even in places like Karimganj, in Salmara, there have been Bangladeshi nationals that have been caught carrying fake Aadhaar cards. So there's been this sort of if we start keeping a track of it, we'll realize how many people are coming in and how porous these borders are. And we also have to now accept that this is the problem is at our doorstep. This is not something that's going to happen a year later. It's not something
Yeah.
now that we can rely on the secular forces on Bangladesh to save them. If we can rely on them to save the ISKCON temple, chances are very unlikely they're going to save anybody there. And I'll tell you something, when an exodus of people happens, there is no military in the world that will open fire on women and children. And as we know through a lot of our protests, also that women and children are used as fodder, as defense,
Yeah.
because you know nobody is going to open fire on them.
Right.
So within the border security force and also in the Indian government have already highlighted, and I'm saying this to you because look at how quick it is. They've already highlighted that ABT, the Ansarullah Bangla team,
Hmm.
also a very, very well-known pan-Islamic militant organization,
Yeah.
has links to Al Qaeda and has been trying to create unrest in the northeast. They've established sleeper cells within India's northeastern states, and it is
I
as
see.
recently, yeah, and it is as recently as May that Assam police apprehended two ABT linked terrorists, which I have to tell you, one gentleman was called Bahar Mia, and the other
Okay.
gentleman, I laughed a lot, and maybe I shouldn't, it's so inappropriate, was called Rarely Mia, Rareily. So Rarely Mia and Bahar Mia were hanging out in Assam and were ABT operatives. So it hasn't taken them any time to start this sort of infiltration into the Northeast. And it really, really worries me. And I've said this in all my talks, that let's not be stupid about this. We have a problem already, and you'll hear this in all my talks. I repeat it because I think people aren't realizing it. The great game West was played in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is done and over with. The mess it is in, we already know. The US came into Afghanistan, the US left Afghanistan, now we have the Taliban there. We know, what happened with Pakistan. You want to keep these Oxford educated leadership. I think Afghanistan's leadership at that time was, I think he went to Cornell or something, if I'm not mistaken, but in university. And Imran Khan went to Oxford.
Yeah.
Yunus himself is very well versed with the Western world. These
Yeah.
people can't control populations like this. So
Right.
we have to accept that we have to stop relying at the goodwill of the few people and poets that we know. We have to
Yeah.
understand that there is radicalization that always wins. Great Game West is over. What we are looking at is the new Great Game East, which is going to involve Bangladesh, the Bay of Bengal, Myanmar, China, and that's going to be on our doorstep. This is the reason there have been high alerts that have been issued along the border with Bangladesh. There is all sorts of fresh intelligence inputs that have been coming on the major influx of illegal immigrants. We are unable to plug it just because of the size of our borders. And we already know that Assam has 40% population of
Yeah.
either people from Bangladesh or their descendants. Either way,
Hmm. Hmm.
we already know that Assam, how it voted in this elections also. The
Hmm.
person who got the largest, uh, uh, you know, uh, largest votes in the country,
Hmm.
Rakib Hussain.
Hmm.
One should look into how he got it and why he got it.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, we need to stop romanticizing our neighbors and now really look at reality of the situation.
In the interest of doing that, do you think this was inevitable, or did Awami League specifically screw things up? Because I hear that she was also going on funding those madrasas, and maybe if she didn't do those, even she could not have kept the country stable for these few years that she did. or could she have done something differently that would have led to better results?
See, look, I think she was in a tough position. We've been hearing for
Right.
years there's huge amount of unrest against her, huge amount of unrest against her. And she
Yeah.
was trying to keep the radical influence at bay by somehow involving them. But I think this is the pacifist mistake that we make.
I
Uh,
see.
and I think this is what we do across countries, where we are always trying to pacify radical elements, then take them out. They are radical for a reason. Giving them representation or giving them some sort of foothold in society is not going to de radicalize them, but is possibly going to rub off the radicalization on more people. And I think
Yeah.
in her attempt to stay in power and her attempt to appease, um, the tables turned on her. Of course, I don't think she could have done anything right or wrong because the US wanted to get her. And
Hmm.
they did. Um, I had an opportunity to meet some US thinkers recently, and
Okay.
they're very high up in DC
Okay.
in terms of policy and being well-known, renowned intellectuals.
Okay.
And they were very upset uh, that people had been saying that there was a regime change by the US in Bangladesh.
Hmm.
And I found it shocking because maybe it's their policy not to accept it, fair enough.
Hmm.
But it wasn't even as if the US ever tried to take out a defense. There
Hmm.
wasn't a single article that said, oh, well, South Asia, Southeast Asia, everybody's blaming us for a regime change in Bangladesh, but da 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 da. That's why it's of
Right.
no interest to us.
Their defense
Usually,
only has been that how can you say this? That's the only thing they've been saying.
yeah, it's complete outrage. Like, oh my God, it's
Yeah.
outrageous.
Yeah.
So I said to them, I said, I mean, people, you can't have this little respect for
Hmm.
other people and what they think. Because if you did have a little respect, you'd at least have you'd make the attempt to have
Yeah.
some amount of counter to it. That also you didn't. But if you were to ask me, and this would be my personal take on this, is that of course they were involved. Of course, we know they've been involved in other places. There's no reason to believe that suddenly they wouldn't be interested in Bangladesh. Of course, that they feel that radical elements are elements that they can flirt with and control. They've never been able to control them, and they don't learn from their mistakes. So I don't think Sheikh Hasina had a chance in hell. Um, she People wanted to remove her. We know that Mohammed Yunus, how he also, or the people who lobbied for his Nobel as well. We know that he was well versed with the Nobel. We know that he was playing their cards. That's one of the
Yeah.
reasons in his first trip to the US, he brought up the Rohingyas. Um,
Hmm.
clearly the Rohingyas in a country that's falling apart, that's your country. The refugees cannot be your first point of interest.
Right.
So I do feel that Sheikh Hasina could not have got out of this one. And
Right.
I do feel that there were many international interests involved. And if the US would be interested, there would be other, whether it's the European Union or whether it's some other countries that would also be
Yes.
interested.
Yes. By the way, ma'am, what you were saying in the beginning that they are saying that no, there is no genocide, but that's only because it's at the moment the hatred against Hindus is that overt only for the last few months, but it's the signs seem to be there that it might get to that. But remember, right from 2013 onwards, the leftists in India had been saying that exact same thing against Narendra Modi, that the moment he comes to power, there's going to be a genocide against Muslims. And since then, they've been saying any day now, any day now. It's about to happen. The moment the Ram Janmabhoomi verdict comes out, or the moment Kashmir Files releases, or the moment the Mandir consecration happens, that's when it's going to happen, and that day never comes. So their parameters had been the same anyway.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing about the left is it's so self-absorbed that being alarmist at their end and creating chaos by their alarmist views is
Hmm.
justifiable as long as they're doing it. If
Yeah.
somebody else does it, it's not justifiable for them. So if other
Yeah.
people are saying that, look, hey, Bangladesh has it does have the right ingredients to blow up in our faces. If there's a regime change, it'll be like, oh well, there's been um, human rights violations, allegations against Sheikh Hasina. But they refuse to look at the bigger picture. They are basically, I feel, the left, the so-called secularists in India are losing steam. They are losing their plush jobs. They are not getting the kind of attention that they were getting. They, are not getting to go to conferences abroad, which is what they used
Right.
to thrive on. And this is what is causing them all this heartburn and anxiety, because I tell you, there is no rational human being in the world who understands or is even mildly educated, who will not understand the threat that India's northeastern borders are at. It's not just about militancy, terrorism, which of course is at the forefront of our problems right now in the northeast. We've already seen these cropping up in terms of Manipur. We see Mizoram. Uh, I don't like to rake this up because I don't like to give it more attention than need be, but I'll leave it to your audience to read about it more. That we also saw the Mizoram chief minister go to the US without, I believe, the government of India permission, and appeal to the US for some sort of support,
Intervention.
uh,
Right.
intervention, support, whatever it may be. Of course, he gave a clarification, but where do you think this sort of confidence comes from? So
Hmm.
there's also, when things like this happen in countries that are across the border, too close for comfort, it also gives certain people with certain agendas, certain groups with certain agendas, certain amount of confidence to say
Yeah.
things, do things, and that, of course, can turn into something bigger. So there's militancy, there's terrorism, there's this sort of bad political encouragement. There's also the question of drugs. We've dealt with uh, Northeast being the landing point of drugs, not just from Myanmar. I think we spoke about that last time. But we must also understand that landing from Bangladesh, the drugs trafficking from Bangladesh also is a huge problem for us. Um, we know that Manipur, Mizoram have huge rates of HIV. Manipur used to have the highest in the country once upon a time, and then it went to Mizoram. Um, One of the reasons was through intravenous drug usage, syringes. And it is only
I see.
recently,
Yeah.
since the regime change in Bangladesh, that the BSF has thwarted major attempts of narcotics trade into Tripura. I think they see something like brown sugar valued at like some crores. They also arrested over 1,300 Bangladeshis, and I think there was another 2,000. Oh no, sorry, another 5,000 undocumented people that have been found roaming around in the Northeast. So,
Hmm.
why do you think they're coming? This is not exactly skilled labor that is coming in, and this is probably people within all 5,000 of them, of course, are not going to be trained or trained terrorists or drug traffickers or so on and so forth. But again, these are people that can be used as assets within the country. The NIA also recently conducted a simultaneous search on multiple locations, and they found that there was all sorts of illegal activity happening. All these locations were Bangladeshi nationals who were a part of uh, Al Qaeda's, who were all a part of Al Qaeda and with an agenda to destabilize the Northeast. Now, obviously, a lot of this was across the country, uh, the raids that happened. And the raids that happened were from Tripura, Assam, West Bengal, but there were raids that happened in Jammu and Kashmir, Karnataka as well. So you see, people come in and they spread across the country. There are
Hmm.
certain areas that some of them go more in, some operatives, and some operatives, of course, go to some lesser suspected areas like Karnataka. But
Hmm.
what does this tell a reasonable person, that this is a multi-pronged problem that is not just going to impact the Northeast but across the country? So now the left and the secularists can keep saying whatever, keep saying that, keep comparing the Indian situation where there is no situation to all these situations across, but it certainly isn't the same. There aren't any
Hmm.
terror organizations in India that are going to Bangladesh. There aren't any
Yeah.
people, refugees who are trying to enter Bangladesh. There isn't a regime that is neighborhood not friendly. One of our most important policies is the neighborhood first policy. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, we have things like this. So, this sort of comparison, again, I say this is intellectual rigging. You rig
Yeah.
something in, and you will make people believe that you're on the right side of the coin. But
Yeah.
history will judge them very harshly, because history is already judging them very harshly for the kind of problems that they have put us in already.
Yes, ma'am. And there is a in their minds people who are not even in higher positions, like just students who have just done their graduations and masters. Their minds are already rigged to this extent that they have a hierarchy of massacres in their minds. I once asked a presidency graduate and masters friend of mine that, okay, why are you, even back then, even I was not a right winger myself. I had just become a pro free market libertarian guy. So back then I asked a leftist friend of mine who was staunchly anti BJP guy that, okay, why do you hate BJP to this extent? Let's say hypothetically Trinamool comes to power and 50 CPM men get killed, or CPM comes to power and 50 Trinamool men get killed. Is that objectively somehow worse or better than hypothetically BJP coming to power and let's say a riot happens and 5 Muslims get killed? Which is better? He said that no, dying on the basis again or getting killed on the basis of religion, no matter how small the number, that's way too more significant to avoid and objectively worse than 50 that's happening at the hands of CPM or Trinamool without the context of religion.
Um, Incredible logic. You
Yeah.
know, that defies me. But this was
Yeah.
the case. This was the case earlier on, when we were growing up as well. That
Hmm.
I think the essential difference came from, there's no justification to it why there shouldn't be a vibrant opposition. Why shouldn't there be another party apart from the
Hmm.
Congress, or apart from left-leaning parties that should be in power in India? The problem, in my this is again my opinion, my limited
Hmm.
sort of opinion. I think that we were so brainwashed, our backbone was broken, wherein we thought everything that was Indian, or anybody who wore their Indianness on their sleeve or their religion on their sleeve,
Yes.
and was not impressed by the West,
Yeah.
were uncivilized, or were
Yeah.
just not worth being part of educated society.
Yeah.
Therefore, anybody, therefore, if you wanted to be if you wanted to be a part of society, you wanted to be considered educated, you needed to speak in proper English,
Hmm.
you needed to have a great vocabulary, you needed to
Yeah.
have traveled abroad, or at the most, been able to carry off Western clothes, and which nobody ever questioned. So
Yeah.
decades went by that nobody questioned this. This was a given, that people would save up money to send their children to English schools. Of course,
Yeah.
there were some benefits to it, that Indians became very good at being getting employed abroad, as opposed to the Chinese, because they never spoke
Yeah. English.
English, and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. But that's a very, very small price to pay for, a very, very big price to pay for the kind of backbreaking that they did. So I think the leftists, the secularists, really come from that point of view, where they look down upon us, and now we are. And you don't have to be a BJP supporter. You just have to be anti-left and anti-Congress,
Yeah.
to be considered the junglies. So
Yes.
if there is one random attack, one random, uh, and I would be able to say this openly, that I don't believe in any sort of vigilantism.
Hmm.
But if there is, in a country which has over 1 billion people, there is a couple of incidents of vigilantism, the entire Hindu community will be blamed. The
Hmm.
entire political party in government will be blamed. Prime
Hmm.
Minister Modi will be personally blamed.
Yeah.
But anything can happen in West Bengal. Anything
Hmm.
can happen in Kerala. Anything can happen in Jammu and Kashmir. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So this sort of hypocrisy, and where have they got this hypocrisy from? Have you seen what is happening in the US?
Hmm.
It's mothership of this sort of hypocrisy.
Hmm.
Consistently saying that, oh, Trump will come and there'll be disaster and there'll be this, there'll
Yeah.
be that. I mean, it was just not about being alarmist. There was a witch hunt against the man.
Yeah.
Whether it was cases, it was, putting up penalties to the amount of $450 million.
Yeah.
Who gives a penalty like that? But
Yeah.
anyway, there was a whole array of people being banned from certain states, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
For what? For Biden to go and give a presidential pardon to Hunter?
Yeah.
I mean, this is where we get, this is where the left gets its hypocrisy from. The left doesn't want to, my friend, go to China and settle down, go to Cuba and settle down. Left wants its children to settle down in the US.
Yeah.
उनकी hypocrisy के बारे में तो कम ही बात करें. And
Yeah.
अगर political and security lens analysis ना ही करें, it will be better.
Yeah.
Because everything that they have ever pointed out has been wrong.
Yes.
So this might not
Like,
be, they might need a new day job.
yeah, like even a few days back, somebody pointed out that economist Jayati Ghosh had said that once Javier Milei becomes the president of Argentina, Argentina will go to hell, their economy will get destroyed, and that man has brought down inflation so much. Inflation, like there was nothing else remaining to destroy in Argentina that Javier Milei could have destroyed it.
Destroy. And what is this sort of analysis? Do they ever go back to the drawing board and think that we've, for the last 20 years that we've been working, we've got every single thing wrong?
Yeah,
Maybe we need to, there's no embarrassment to it either.
yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, so I think they are hardened,
Yeah,
sort of criminals, so as to say.
yeah. So, ma'am, I'm wondering, where does now China and the Republican Party come into question? What are their views, do you think, in terms of the Bangladesh and Indian Northeast situation? Who has what kind of stakes?
Look, the US, we already know. I love talking about this. you know,
Hence a Saturday free day.
yeah. People go out, and this is what I enjoy doing is talking about
Yeah,
what
yeah,
plans are. So, we already know about the US. The US was heavily involved. So was and when we talk about the US, we don't talk about the US alone. We talk about the United Kingdom as well. We talk about the European Union as well, because they follow
hmm,
suit to whatever the US does. And
yeah,
I have spoken about this on your show before, that there was a time when the British wanted a crown colony to be made
hmm,
out of the northeastern region. They thought they'd withdraw from India. It was time for them to go, but they thought, oh, this would be great because here we would have this very geographically natural resources rich sort of location, which would also act as our
right,
base against China. Towards the larger Southeast Asia, they realized its geopolitical value, its geostrategic value, and therefore this plan was put into place. It was also called the Kuplan Plan, uh, and it never, luckily for us, ended up working out because it was just too far, it was too remote, and they frankly had run out of money. Now, cut to, they never stopped trying, and that is why
hmm,
the NSCN had so much of support in Nagaland. And the reason NSCN becomes really important is because it's the longest running insurgency in the country. Um, uh, of course, NSCN, was formed formed later, and it came from, this other platform of separatist ideology. Where did that ideology come from? It again came from the fact that, there was a very functional, very successful plan of converting. Once the tribes in what we now know as Nagaland were converted, they gave them the umbrella identity of Naga. If you till date go to Nagaland and go back and meet some old grandmothers and the elders, they
hmm,
rarely ever will understand the word Naga because they still self identify themselves as by their tribal names, whether they're Aos or Ngamis or so on and so forth.
Okay.
Now, uh, when they didn't even have scripts,
Yeah.
the Naga tribes didn't even have a script. So
Hmm.
when the script was made, and you have to give it to the missionaries, they did make a lot of effort. And of course, we can't ever any longer say all of it was negative. Of course, some of them might have been motivated by the kind of remote living circumstances and humanitarian sort of needs of tribal communities. But majority of them, and let's not make any bones about it, were driven by the fact that they had encountered pagan populations and they wanted to convert them. Now, the
Right.
reason this background is because if this identity had not been created, Nagalim for Christ would not have become the slogan for the separatist movement.
Yeah.
It's not Nagaland for everybody. It's
Yes.
not it's not Nagaland for you know for the upliftment of people. It's
Yeah.
Nagaland for Christ.
And they are
And
Christian socialists, right?
अब वो तो मैंने actually once had met some operatives from K, and
Okay.
they were very uh, very helpful in terms of they were very open in giving information, and we were
Okay.
sitting and okay. And I did ask them this. I said, is it because a lot of your training happened in China? Because they used to,
Hmm.
all the training, the Nagas would walk through and take the help of some sibling tribes across in
Hmm.
Myanmar and then
Okay.
go to the Yunnan region, and that's where they got their training. So I said,
Hmm.
is it inspired from China? Do you still have support from China? This was about maybe 10, 15 years ago when I met them. And they said, no, no, this is our own version of socialism because we are in
Okay.
villages and,
Acha.
we whatever we earn from our road tax collection, which by the way is entirely illegal.
Yeah.
You can't have insurgent groups collecting like taxes
Yeah.
and things like that. They said, but
Yeah.
how it's distributed amongst the villages with certain amount of equality for the society. And they gave me this sort of an answer to it. Now you can believe it, not believe it, discard it. That's up to
Hmm.
our own analysis. But this is what they
Yeah.
said. Having said that, of course, I also assume that the word socialist must have come in because they wanted to be on China's side. They wanted actually China to be on their side
Okay.
for the kind of support that China was giving them. So it was a way to
Right.
please China as well. That look,
Hmm.
we are going to be socialist as well. But of course, I don't think that really, would have solved any problems or, uh, that would have finally, in the end, even if their agendas would have been met, brought them closer to China. But
Hmm.
this is the reason that they gave me. Now, having said
Right.
that, the US also sent, there were missionaries even during independence, if you remember, Reverend, mm, I'm forgetting his name, it'll come to me, Michael Scott, huh? Reverend Michael
Okay.
Scott was actually, I mean, how notorious must he have been that Jawaharlal Nehru actually took this firm decision to expel him from India? I
Hmm.
mean, he must have really, really, really been bad. Now, he
Yeah.
was an American, he was a missionary. He was also the guy who said, I will negotiate between the Nagas and the Indians to come
Okay.
to some amount of understanding. Instead,
Okay.
he was going behind the back of the government of India and
Hmm.
also trying to cut deals with China. And that's the reason he
Understand.
was expelled. So obviously, the US always thinks it can play one against the other and somehow it can control another country. And I hope with this new administration in the US that changes this sort of
Hmm.
interference in other countries because these are very complex arenas. These are not easy arenas for even us to understand, and we belong to this country. We understand it
Hmm.
naturally. The Northeasterners
Hmm.
understand that. We understand the Northeast naturally. But
Hmm.
again, only to a certain extent. A
Yeah.
person who is not educated in the region will not understand the different layers. It's not a one
Yes.
layer issue, it's a multi layered problem.
Yes.
So, so the US has always had interests here, and why not? We know
Hmm.
what they eventually went and did in East Timor. We know South Korea has been converted. We know that
Right.
Korean TV is very popular in the Northeast. We know about the kind of conversions that have happened. It's not just happened in Nagaland, but look at Mizoram. Mizoram's 95% or nearly fully converted. You see Manipur, the hill areas are converted. You see, and
Hmm.
they're coming into the valley as well. You see
Yeah.
Arunachal Pradesh, which I find the most staggering out of all the states, had some, I think, if I'm not mistaken, had less than a percent Christian population until 1971. And
I see.
now official statements by very high-ranking ministers in the government, like Kiran Rijiju, they expected it to be 40% by 2020. Today, if you ask a local, they will say, "No, ma'am, it's 60%," because a lot of people have now stopped registering it. To
Oh.
be, yeah, so they're not registering it. So 60%, 70, 90%, Meghalaya. So why
Hmm.
would this happen? When does a religious conversion happen? If I try to convert you, you're probably not going to convert. If somebody tries to convert me, they're definitely not going to be able to convert me. The only way to convert me would happen if I had some deep spiritual experience and I felt that I had to convert. Now that happens
Yeah.
very rarely. I
Yeah.
refuse to believe like in 10 years, 90% of a population, or in 20 years, 90% of a population have this deep spiritual experience. No, it was from the point of the gun. Let us again make no mistake that insurgent groups use the point of the gun to convert. They use social pressure, they used insurgency. So, what we are dealing with in the Northeast is a Bangladesh's impact, not just on drugs, not just on destabilizing the Northeast, militancy, insurgency, plus a certain amount of curbing of India's international connectivity ambitions, which
Right.
also happened through Bangladesh. So that all of that is jeopardized. But then you have the US in Bangladesh,
Hmm.
where there are all these talks about the Rohingyas and this and that. That really worries me because they are sitting in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh and on the Tombro border. Then you
Hmm.
have the US interest in Myanmar.
Hmm.
They are supporting the National Unity Government, which is the umbrella group for all the ethnic armed organizations. There are multiple ethnic armed organizations
Yeah.
like Panami, the Chin National Front, TNLA, MNDA, so on and so forth. There's so many of them. And within
Okay.
them, also there are factions. Now they've come under an umbrella group called the National Unity Government. Now the National Unity Government is being supported by the US. Not only do they have an office a stone's throw away from the White House, but the US Congress also passed something to the amount of $500 million to them earlier this year. I don't know how much has reached, I don't know how much has been disbursed, but tell me something. Again, these are reasonable, rational questions. Do you think a country that has not been able to manage its own ethnic armed organizations, that
Hmm.
they have fought with each other time and again, a
Hmm.
country which has always had the military be a part of its politics from time
Hmm.
immemorial? 25% seats in the parliament are reserved for them by the constitution for the military. You know, why are you funding the national unity government? Do you think the national unity government is going to come and suddenly bring all these ethnic armed organizations and their ambitions, uh, give them an umbrella and bring them together? No. The only thing common for all these organizations is let's overturn junta. Now, here's what will happen. The junta, the military, whether you like them or not, whether you call them democratic, undemocratic, they tried to do. Though, let me tell you, General Flynn, who's the leader of the government at this point, said that we'll have a census by November, and then we'll go into elections. Now, November censuses was blocked by the locals, saying that it's being done, and they had objections to it. So therefore, I don't know where it stands at this point. But the fact of the matter is that national unity government, being funded by the US, has brought the military, the Tatmadaw, closer to China. So now what the US is doing is it's scaring everybody.
Hmm.
So by coming in, it's scaring China. So China has actually asked for a JSVC, which is a joint security company venture with the Tatmadaw to provide security in Myanmar. That means they will become stakeholders. Now, this hasn't been finalized, of course, but
Okay.
this is a very, very, very big thing. very big development that's happened.
Yeah.
China proposes this. Tatmadaw realizes we can't look after these, we can't back these EAOs off any longer. Um, China will come in as a security player in Myanmar. China is not liking the fact that the EAOs are being supported by the US. They think that's a sign that the US is having a footprint in Myanmar. Now, the
Hmm.
US is doing this because the US realizes that this is a very important area. Now, if they want to break it up, like in a lot of other places where they've been involved in splitting areas
Hmm.
and countries,
Yeah.
it's going to be in a mess. India's benefit is that Myanmar remains united, that
Okay.
India can negotiate and have good relations with not just the EAOs across their border, but also with the military junta. That is where India's benefit lies, and India realizes that. But with US having a footprint in Bangladesh, with US having a footprint in Myanmar, with China becoming nervous, coming in a bigger way into Myanmar, with China becoming nervous and also coming into a bigger way in Bangladesh in the
Yeah.
near future, is going to play havoc with us. And we need to be ready for that. That's why when we look at Bangladesh, it's very important that we don't look at Bangladesh just as piecemeal. We look at it in context to what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening in Bay of Bengal, and what's happening in the north.
Right. What are Yunus and China relations? What are they like? Do
See,
they
I
like
believe,
him?
yeah, so I believe just now there was, you may have heard about this, there was a lecture by a Bangladeshi professor called Dr. Shahiduzzaman or something like that. He's
Okay.
a professor of international relations. And
Okay.
he described the Chinese designed J-7 jets that are co-produced by Pakistan.
Right.
He said that equivalent to the F-35s that the US uh, sold, and called
Hmm.
for Bangladesh to acquire three squadrons. And
Hmm.
they said that if Bangladesh can do this, it will discourage India. I don't know what they want to discourage India with, but
Hmm.
more than that, and I thought this was a bizarre statement to come from a professor. He went on to say that, he referenced the ongoing unrest in Manipur and said that, Bangladesh should capitalize on the instability and provide support to Assamese insurgents. Of course, I'm not saying that this guy is like really sound of mind or whatever. That's a different thing. But the fact is that, they feel, and this is reflection of the fact that they feel that any enemy of India, or you know anywhere they can have benefit against, and that could lead to anything against India, would be a great thing. This is the common sentiment there, and therefore it is. I think as we speak right now, if I'm not wrong, or it's just completed, that there was a Bangladeshi delegation in China. So, so we have to. It's very important for us to look at the kind of moves that are being made. See, the Yunus administration has also released, as soon as they came in, I don't know, with all these protests that were going on, the kind of killings that were going on. And let's not, I don't even want to talk about the kind of crime against women that must have happened. But with all of this happened, what was the first thing that he did? He released
Yeah.
insurgents, terror outfits like JMB and other organizations, and some of them were even given prominent positions in the new administration. So I believe that they can have, they can go and extend to appease the radical forces in their country
Hmm.
and create this sense of this new radical nationalism uh, based on hating India. And see, India also must understand. Well, India shouldn't actually understand this. Indians must understand this, that this is the problem of being a big country in a
Hmm.
place like this region that we are in,
Yeah.
because we are surrounded by smaller countries with not great economy, failing stability, and internal politics. Obviously, the way any party is going to play their politics is on making somebody a villain so that it raises some sort of nationalistic fervor in their country. We
Right.
saw what happened in Sri Lanka, we saw what happened in Maldives. This is
Yeah.
also happening in Bangladesh, but unfortunately for us in Bangladesh, it's on our borders. And like I said, we have a great amount of. It's not just about terror. It's not about uh, militancy. We also have connectivity, and that is where when Bangladesh begins to falter, that is when China is going to come in, which it already has with its money, and try to bring in more infrastructural sort of initiatives. We obviously, for obvious reasons, that will not be great for us. Northeast India and Bangladesh's relationship has been very critical because of the kind of connectivity and the subroutes that it would have provided to the Northeast, giving some relief to the chicken's neck. All of this can be uh, jeopardized. Even the Agartala Khara rail line, the Chittagong port, all of this with Chinese entry into, which it already has, but more Chinese footprint into Bangladesh could become very difficult for us. So I
Right.
think we have to keep the whole Chinese dynamic also in mind. But I'll tell you something, China
Hmm.
at this point is a little bit more worried about its Myanmar border because
I
that
see.
impacts them directly. All the gambling units, all the cybercrime scams, all happen from this border. And this
Okay.
border also has communities that are of the Chinese Han
Oh,
descendants.
I see.
So it's this sort of Chinese Myanmarese community that is on the northern borders of uh, Myanmar.
Myanmar.
So they are preoccupied with that because even the guys they get to work in this cyber slavery farms and these cyber scams are people from China. So therefore, every scam that is made is first made in Chinese and tested in China. Number two, they had a
Oh,
big problem with the kind of kids who were going across the border into Myanmar to work in these places because families were getting upset because once they'd go in, their phones would be taken. It's like cyber slavery. So they'd never be heard from ever again. Also, we must remember, so therefore, China made a huge attempt at cracking down on these gambling centers, these cyber scams centers. But we must also understand that China has a huge BRI ambition in Myanmar. So they have a oil line, uh, uh, gas and oil pipeline that goes from Kunming down to the Bay of Bengal, and
okay.
that's in jeopardy. They also have an ambition to have the a rail line come right through. That is also in jeopardy. So their own assets are in jeopardy. The Chinese consulate in Mandalay was attacked. It was, I think, burned down or something. A Chinese-owned nickel factory and cement factory in Myanmar was burned down. So right now, if you were to ask me what would China's assessment be or their intention be in Bangladesh, I would say right now our problems would be Bangladesh, their radical forces, Myanmar and the US footprint there. China has too much on its plate. And
Hmm.
also, as China and India relations thaw, they are not going to be really in that space of, to create problems for us as of now. Of course, things can change later, and we know that
Yeah.
uh, we, share mistrust, which is
Right.
different, so things might change later. But I think right now our problems are these.
Right. So, ma'am, we were supposed to do it only for 1 hour. I have countless questions, but can you just go through four questions, five questions very quickly, if you can?
Please, please,
Uh,
please. You do.
yeah, we have three super chat questions, but before that, I'll ask one of mine, which is that are you aware of some kind of weapons exchange nexus between China, the Naxals of India forever since the 60s, and Bangladeshi Islamist radicals?
Hmm.
ever since 71 onwards.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been a known nexus because you can tell where the weapons are made from, and those weapons
Right.
used to be cheaper than
Hmm.
other weapons that you used to get. So the Chinese weapons used to be cheaper, so they used to get those. So that's always been. And how do you know this? You know this by the kind of weapons that are caught on the northeast.
Hmm.
We know even as of now. मतलब पहले की बात तो छोड़ो. अभी भी if you see. Some of the drones are being made by spare parts that you can get online. Um,
Okay.
they're not buying the drones. So the Chin National Front or the CNA Chin National Army
Hmm.
in Chinland in Myanmar, they have a
Yeah.
drone team. So a lot of the drones are big cargo drones, and they're made out of spare parts. Where do they get the spare parts from? These are Chinese made cheap spare parts, and we know that there's been entry of unmanned objects into the northeastern region as well.
Hmm.
So, I'm not saying, see, weapons is one thing. I'm not saying that the China factor is not something that one shouldn't
Care about.
concentrate on,
Yeah.
but we should also, when we're looking at security things, we should also look at it time wise in terms of what is happening right now. So, like earlier on,
Right.
I
Right.
mentioned about, sorry to just go off 1 minute, but earlier on, I'd mentioned about uh, these people touring, the Bangladeshis touring China at this point,
Hmm. Yeah.
and this has come on Beijing's invitation.
Hmm.
That's actually what we know, that it's come on Beijing's invitation. And,
Oh.
experts say that it's part of a strategy of the CPC to engage with power centers in South Asian countries. And post the fall of Sheikh Hasina, I remember
Hmm.
one ambassador making this point, saying that I knew that there was going to be a regime change when Sheikh Hasina in China was not given the due
Okay.
respect that she deserved. That's when I knew that China knew that
Right.
there would be a
She's
regime
going to
change.
fall. Right.
Yeah, so therefore, China inviting a 14-member team that is led by Jamaat-e-Islami's central leader, Nayab-e Amir,
Hmm.
is should get our antennas up. And
Yeah.
we know he is known for holding an anti-India stance. Now, of course, China also engaged with Awami League since 2009. It also has old ties
Yeah.
with BNP, including with
Right.
Jamaat. But the fact of the matter is that Jamaat has never criticized China for its treatment of the Uyghurs. So
Yeah.
when yeah, so, so what I'm trying to say is that weapons will always be there.
Hmm.
These things will always happen. China, if you look at it, China has the right to engage with them because it's a new government. We have,
Right.
we have a Mr. Misri also who's gone to Bangladesh. I think Kal
Hmm.
hai meeting, if I'm
Okay.
not mistaken. So we also engaging and trying to see the best that we can make out of situations on ground. But the
Hmm.
fact of the matter is that I think the Islamic radicalization right now from Bangladesh is going to be a bigger problem, and the insurgency coming in from Myanmar is going to be the bigger problem. China is going to take a little
Hmm.
time and see
I see.
how and engage with the present government, but they also know that these might not be the people who might be there forever. So it's going to play a
Right.
cautious.
Right. So Bangladeshi Islamist radicals, Chinese communist, and Bengali Naxals. This is what meant when he said unity in diversity. Uh, so Augustus Iro is asking, what is the reason behind India's lackluster response to the Bangladesh situation?
See, I think I don't think it's a lackluster response. I think it's a wait and watch response. I don't
Right.
think uh, we have to be realistic about it. I don't think India, being the kind of responsible country that it is going to send in militaries to interfere with the country's internal dealings. Of course, it's made very strong statements of what has been happening with the Hindus in Bangladesh. Therefore, the kind of engagement that is happening at the level that it's happening right now with Mr. Misri going there, uh, this issue is going to be taken up. But we also must remember, when first the regime change happened and we saw people on our borders, it was heart wrenching for everybody. And I remember people were raging on social media saying, let them in, let them in. The fact
Hmm.
of the matter, How do we
Yeah.
know that they are Hindus? How do we know that they are minorities? How do we
Yeah.
know that one of the people who was caught in Assam right now, those people that I was mentioning, one of the
Hmm.
women came with a Hindu name, Hindu Aadhaar card, only to be found out
Exactly.
that she's an ABT operative. So how do we know they're those people? Plus, here is what I think. I think that it is hugely important for us to support minorities in countries across, but especially countries in our neighborhood, so that we have minorities there. To cleanse minorities of these countries en masse does not help our cause. On the contrary, we should be able to support these minorities to thrive in countries like Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka. And by minorities here, I mean largely Hindu minorities. It is,
Yeah.
we have to prevent them from being eradicated from their homes. We have to have representation of these people in these countries. So I don't think in the long term it will serve us a purpose by cleansing these countries and bringing them all in. Yes, we'll save a
I
few
see.
lives. We will
Right.
save a few lives. But
Right.
then we will be surrounded by 100% Islamic countries with no representation and no way for us to point a finger at them and say, look at the mistreatment of minorities that's happening. Then हम कहते रहेंगे कि उस टाइम पे ना 10% होते थे उसके बाद 3% हुए अब है ही नहीं. There's no point of that argument. It's not going to
Right.
serve any purpose. So I think it's very important to maintain these populations there. Of course, they need to be safe and so on and so forth. So I don't think that um, our treatment of Bangladesh is lackluster. This is not how democracies work. This is not how international relations work. Um, what would be a second engagement that would be needed? Nobody's been able to answer this. I know it enrages all of us to see what's happening on ground, but I think the best that can happen now is to support the Awami League. I think India has taken a very strong stance by having Sheikh Hasina be with us, irrespective of the kind of pressure that they have in, extraditing her. Bangladesh wants her back. India is not agreeing to that, and I think that's
Hmm.
show of strength.
All right. Next question is: can you shed more light on Hussein Muhammad Irshad, Bangladeshi president of Bangladesh from 1982 through 1990, his role in radicalization of the Bangladeshi institutions and society?
Look, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that. That might be better if somebody was to read the history books on the
Right.
radicalization of Bangladeshi society.
Okay. Avinav is asking: is there any way available to our government in which we can find out how many illegal Bangladeshis Rohingyas are living within India and can send them back? Is NRC and stuff even possible?
I think there'll be a more or less an assessment, okay,
Okay.
of how many Rohingyas are there. But the fact of the matter is that the Rohingyas in in India have now dispersed. They are in many places, and they've also not just taken the northeastern route, but they've come via Jammu and Kashmir as well. Married locals there. Um,
Yeah.
they are coming, and this is not just Rohingyas, but Bangladeshi immigrants are coming into Nagaland as well. And
Yeah.
marrying locals there. Now, this is very dangerous because the minute you marry locals, you're marrying tribal communities. The chances are that your children will be raised in the Islamic tradition, but the
Yeah.
land that is for the scheduled tribes will come to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this has also been called as land jihad,
Yeah.
and it has impacted not just Kashmir, but it has impacted Assam. It's going to impact Nagaland, and obviously states like Tripura and all. So I think it's difficult to assess how many Rohingyas have come in. But let me say this, and I've said this in a lot of articles that I write, that we have over 1 million Rohingyas sitting on our Tombru and Cox's Bazar border, Bangladesh's. Um, they are sitting in silence. So they were asked at
Okay.
some point by the Myanmarese government to come back, and they
Okay.
refused, saying that Arakan Army, which is a militant Buddhist ethnic organization,
Yeah.
will not come back because they really
Right.
beat them up and sent them off. Um, Now, Arakan Army has pretty much taken control of Rakhine.
Okay.
Hmm? Matlab,
Okay.
it's a very important base because Rakhine is a big important state and has the Western Command there. So it's taken
Yeah.
over, more or less, it's taken over Rakhine. Now,
Hmm.
if Arakan army is taken over Rakhine, then obviously the Rohingyas are not going to go back.
Right.
So they are here to stay. Now,
Yeah.
if you also note that they have been ARSA, which is the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, which is a militant organization
Yeah.
and responsible for the Khao massacre of the Hindu women and children in Myanmar. Um,
I see.
did you know about this?
No.
So basically, people wonder why the Rohingyas are not allowed, or why the Home Minister made the kind of, because he's made very strong statements saying you do whatever during the CA time, but the Rohingyas are never going to come into this country. The reason that he's done that is historically we've had a problem with them. The during
Oh.
independence, they at that time they were not called Rohingya, they were called Arakan Muslims. They were
Okay.
being trained by ISI to launch an attack on Tripura whenever need be. This was
I
communicated, and
see.
I have quoted this in one of my articles where the first IB minister is informing the government of this, saying that they are being, IB head is informing the Indian government of
Okay.
this, saying that in an official letter, saying that the Arkan Muslims are being trained with the promise that they will be launched to attack India, and they wanted Bangladesh, they wanted Tripura to be a part of East Pakistan as well. So to take Tripura. So one is that historical context. Number two is that in Rakhine, there are Hindus also, there were Buddhists also, there were these Arkan Muslims also. It was in, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2015, or I'm talking about very recently,
I
that
see.
the Rohingyas attacked the Hindus in a village called Khao Mensek, and it's called the Khao Mensek massacre, when even 99 bodies of women and children was even recovered from a mass grave. And they have constantly harassed Hindus, they have murdered Hindus, there's rape, there's pillage. They've made Hindus refugees, internally displaced people, long before the Myanmar chaos had happened. So Rohingyas have a
I see.
contentious history with Hindus. Now, if they are sitting on this border, on the Tombro and the Cox's Bazar border, and they're
Hmm.
sitting inside, ARSA has not so far got super involved in the chaos in Myanmar. Um, some of the Rohingyas have been conscripted by the Myanmarese junta to fight
Okay.
against the ethnic armed organizations. But remember and understand, this is a little complex. So the Rohingyas that are living in Arakan will fight against the Arakan army because they're still living there. So they don't mind joining forces with junta. मगर जो
Hmm.
कॉक्सेस बाजार में बैठा है, जो टोम्ब्रो बॉर्डर में बैठा है, उसको तो वैसे ही वापस नहीं जाना है ना,
Yeah.
तो वो तो वहीं बैठने वाला है. Now
Yeah.
Yunus has gone and spoken in the US. He's brought up the concerns of the Rohingya, and I'm
Hmm.
sure he's spoken the Western language because
Yeah.
he is supported by the West.
Hmm.
And the Western language basically says, "Oh, poor Rohingyas, they must be given, safety and
Yeah.
refuge and this and that." My fear is that maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but in time they are going to ask for territory. And once
Oh.
they ask for territory, then they are going to be on our borders forever. And that is going to be very dangerous for us. Let us also not forget that Rohingya leadership, ARSA leadership, has been trained in Saudi Arabia and are Pakistanis. They are not Myanmaris or Bangladeshis.
Yeah. On that positive note, ma'am, the last question, uh, that why and how are you so actually passionate about the Northeast? Because you seem to be actually passionate. Because the first time I came across your name was when I was a hardcore Desai Deepak fan all day long, and you had asked him on your podcast. So I thought, okay, she's a random another podcaster who's come up now. Then I Google you months later, and then people start calling you the Northeast expert. So I thought, okay, who is she? Then I further dug into your videos and speeches when I was about to invite you on my podcast. Then I see that you have studied anthropology of religions and stuff. But then I saw in one of your videos you were giving sort of a motherly consolation to the people of Northeast when the conflict broke out. So how do you look at that work of yours with such passion, because you don't seem to be you don't seem to have that kind of detachment that okay, it's just another job, at least my day job, and I'll go home and Northeast will go to hell when I go to sleep. That seems to be very unhealthy for the mind as well. So why and how are you so invested in the Northeast?
So, I will have to take 5 minutes because it's not that easy to explain.
Yeah.
It took me many months to explain it to my parents.
Right.
Uh, but the thing is that it's very important if you're really truly nationalist. First of all, I'm not a podcaster.
Yeah,
I've never
that's what I realized later on. Yeah.
I've never been,
Yeah.
because I'm associated to India Foundation, which works on policy, and I'm not full time. I'm a distinguished fellow. That means they
Yeah.
bring me on my expertise. Um,
Yeah.
One of the things that I do for them, or I used to do for them, is Insight, which was their podcast. And it was interesting
Right.
for me because for me, meeting people with such intellect that we had access to was
Hmm.
learning two more things. So
Hmm.
every time I have a conversation, if I learn two more things, it
Yeah.
makes it worthwhile for me. But the
Yeah.
reason the piece was very interesting to me was as a child, I had some very basic questions. If we wanted to
Okay.
travel in India, we'd be happy enough to go to Bombay or
Hmm.
Gujarat or even down south. But the question never came up of going to the northeast. As far
Hmm.
as you went to the northeast was maybe Darjeeling or
Yeah.
which is West Bengal.
Yeah.
Nobody ever thought of going to Nagaland for a holiday or Assam
Hmm.
for a holiday. Then
Hmm.
when I grew up a little bit more, and I used to think about this when I was like maybe 12, 13, and wonder why don't we go there? Sounds pretty
Hmm.
exotic. I didn't know much about it, didn't know the
Yeah.
geography. When I became a little older and started reading, all I would hear was bomb attacks, insurgencies, separatist movements. And this really got my interest, because uh, you live in Delhi and you never have to worry about all of this. You never have to think about, somebody taking money or
Yeah.
extortion or it's unheard of. It's
Yeah.
obviously it had its own problems, but it wasn't
Hmm.
institutionalized to this kind of
Yeah.
extent. And also, insurgencies interested me. But in those days, I found out very quickly that women could not be in active combat in the army, which was very sad for me. And I
Hmm.
said, well, I'm not going to push paper. That's going to be very boring. And there wasn't
Yeah.
anybody from my family in the defense forces either. So then,
Okay.
and then I started reading more about the Northeast, and I found out that it was fully converted. So I started thinking there must be something very specific about the Northeast if it's been converted to this kind of an extent. That's why I actually graduated in Christian theology. And I realized that there were two small subjects that come out of Christian theology. One is called liberation, and one is called black theology. Liberation theology is poverty politics, on how money is used in terms
Hmm.
of to entice people and say that look, you're
Hmm.
poor and we are going to give you salvation, we're going to rid you of your poverty if you become
Hmm.
Christian. And
Hmm.
it's very interesting, if I may bring this in, that when Christianity was just starting off in the Roman Empire,
Hmm.
one of the ways that they did get their foothold was during the big plague. So when the plague happened,
Oh.
the pagans had no idea on how to have, they had no value systems as such which were written, no scriptures. So they didn't know what to do if somebody was dying. So there wasn't a, I would say there was a lack of morality. So they would throw their dead out to die on
Oh.
their own. It was
Okay.
the early Christian community that came and as a community looked after. So even if you look at how Christian communities work today, it's very community centric.
Hmm.
So they'll find you a bride, they'll find you a job, you'll have a church to go to. If you're old and
Yes. Yes.
alone, you have a church. So you have to give that to them. So poverty politics was similar to that, where they try to extract you from poverty and give you opportunities. And then obviously the West was backing them, so
Right.
it was much possible for them to get scholarships, be educated abroad, so on and
Yeah.
so forth. Black theology was what was race theology. So they came into Africa using these strategies and tactics of black theology. And for example, one of the strategy was presenting Jesus and presenting Mother Mary as black, so that there's some amount of correlation.
Yeah.
So when I studied this, I realized the politics of religion. This
Right.
is not just simple spiritual experience that I was
Yeah.
talking about. There's a
Yeah.
whole amount of strategy, there's a whole amount of thinking, there's a whole amount of politics in
Yeah.
religion. And therefore, I did anthropology of religion because I wanted to see how new religions impacted societies. And more often than not, you would find that they fractured them because they didn't come in
Oh,
naturally. There
right.
was an amount of unnatural
Hmm. External
intervention
forces. Yeah.
forces. And we've seen religion in the Northeast being used for geopolitics, for geostrategic uses, like I
Yeah.
mentioned, and so on and so forth. Then, when I came back and I worked in a couple of think tanks and there was no field work, it was very frustrating because you can't study, let alone the Northeast, you can't study any place without actually being there on the field. And then when I
Hmm.
started going there, one of the reasons was that I decided to push this because I was already really fascinated. But
Hmm.
Indians have a problem. We are always talking about history.
Hmm.
Yeah, history's played its role. We know how history has been manipulated. We know that there's a problem. But what about predictive analysis? I'm not
Hmm.
interested in history.
Yeah.
That's why, I don't even really go into a lot of, question answers on history. What I'm interested in is what's going to happen in the next 5 years, what's going to happen in the next 10 years,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
yeah, because until and unless you have this predictive analysis on things, you do it for the stock market, you do it for business.
Yeah.
Why do you not do it for security concerns, for
Yeah.
political concerns? The minute you
Yeah.
start doing this, you have better preparedness. And that's what I started doing. Is I was so concerned about the Northeast, knowing that it has the kind of insurgency it does. It has the kind of tribal issues, inter-tribal issues that it does. It still does, and I'm
Yeah.
still not 100% accepted. And I don't think that's a really good that's really a good marker because I've given my entire life to it, and there'll still be people
Hmm.
who say, "Oh, what do you know about it?" So
Hmm.
this sort of bifurcation in our country can never be good. So
Hmm.
my interest and my passion, which is 24/7, and for
Yeah.
the rest of my life for the Northeast, because half my life is already done and over with, and it's been with the Northeast, so I don't have many choices to make career changes anyway. But the
Yeah.
reason is that I think I've spent enough time to be able to do better predictive analysis than most people, just because of
Hmm.
the amount of time that I've spent. But I also
Yeah.
know this region well enough to know that I don't know everything. So there's still
Hmm.
more for me to learn. So I will continue learning. I will
Hmm.
continue analyzing
Yeah.
it and making predictions on the basis of what I know. I may be wrong at times, but I know that I will still know more than most people who talk about it. It's great that they're interested, but I just think we need to be more responsible when we talk about it because any little thing can create, it's still a very sensitive region and it can create problems. So I think my passion comes from these two things that I like to do predictive analysis. Nobody else was doing the Northeast when I started studying the Northeast, so I thought it was
Yeah.
important to cover it. And the fact that I don't know everything and I want to know everything.
Right. Okay, that's a very fascinating answer, and which gives me the impression that not only is India lucky to have you, not only is the non-left of India lucky to have you, actually the Northeast is also lucky to have you because someone is trying to solve problems and not benefit out of more problems in that region.
Yeah, one has stopped expecting that the left will ever learn. So,
Yeah,
so it's okay.
yeah,
We don't seek acceptance everywhere.
yeah,
You'll always have the haters. So it's okay. As
yeah,
long as one left understands two things that I say out of the 10,
yeah,
that's good enough.
yeah. Are those your dogs barking?
Yeah, I have two dogs. I have
Oh,
Tempo and Kiki. Tempo, I
okay,
picked up from Gurgaon from the road,
okay,
and uh, Tempo is a princess because Tempo believes that she was picked up from the road from a
yeah,
gutter. So Tempo
right,
has a pillow, Tempo has a mattress, Tempo will
yeah,
pull her pill to put it on herself like this. Kiki was supposed to be the pedigreed one,
yeah,
is totally unpedigreed, and I'm very
yeah.
suspicious of her. Yeah, so those are my
For
two dogs.
pedigree, na?
Yeah, but now I have these two dogs who are constantly barking at everything that they shouldn't, and they bark at nothing that they should.
Exactly.
So
That's the scene with us as well. We used to have 3 dogs. Now we have 2. Just last Sunday at 5 in the morning, our golden retriever, who would have turned 13 just this January, she passed away. And we have one streetie
That's
as well. So similar
oh,
behaviors from them.
that's the saddest thing. But 13 is a really good age nowadays for golden.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, my first puppy when I was little lived till 19.
Wow. What breed
Nine,
was he?
she was an Apso, and
Okay.
my parents got her for me when I was very little,
Okay.
and she was with me till I finished college.
Yeah.
I was just like, but they don't make, I think too much of inbreeding or whatever.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, these poor puppies don't live longer than 10, 12,
Right.
30. You'll be lucky to have them. I'm very fond of German Shepherds. Those are my favorite breeds. But
Hmm.
the reason I don't have any now is because most of them don't live beyond 7.
Exactly. And most Labradors in Kolkata as well. They don't live beyond 4, 5 these days because of inbreeding and incest.
This is too sad, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
7 years and 5 years is too little to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The dog market is not regulated at all in India. We'll have to discuss that someday.
Yeah, it isn't. Um,
Absolutely insane.
yeah, because the dog market's abroad. And I've
Yeah.
had, I've sort of, how do I say this? But I've, sort of had puppies when I was studying abroad, um, are so well monitored.
Yeah.
And at that time also they would chip them so that you'd never
Right.
lose them, not go astray.
Yeah.
But then they have their own medical history. So if they got sick
Yes.
and, you had all of that. Of course, I
Yeah.
don't know if it can ever happen here, but I really do think that this sort of, these kind of joints that sell puppies,
Yeah. The puppy mills and all.
puppy mills, something
Yeah.
needs to be done because it's hugely inappropriate for them to be
Yes.
mating as many times as they do, because they say
Yeah.
that the first litter is a great litter, the second not bad, but after the third,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
should not be mating dogs.
Yes.
They don't care. These are production houses. So I think,
Yes.
instead of PETA and all, instead of
Yeah.
being worried about dogs getting scared of firecrackers because my dogs
Yeah.
aren't, they should worry
Yeah.
more about these production houses.
Yes. And there they don't have any teeth. The PETA.
Or during Bakra Eid. It's
Yeah.
very mean.
Yeah.
That's a different
Okay, ma'am.
topic altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, ma'am, for joining us even with the bad health. Thank you very much.
I
We are
almost feel
very
better. So maybe I should talk more about ABT in Bangladesh and Yunus to feel better. But
on a
yeah,
serious note. Do you have time? Then I can continue.
no, I'm going. I have a 4 o'clock flight.
Oh yeah,
Others
yeah,
are
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Then yeah, no more super chat questions as well. Okay. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you
Thank
guys for joining us.
for
Thank you,
having
ma'am, and have a safe trip. Good
me. I
night.
will. Good night.
Yeah. Good night, guys.
वंशवरूढं महाभीमं गुणाद्रष्टाङ्गरप्रदं हस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशिं ललज्जयः पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते कालिका